Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Threadbare review. Today's subject is the request of patron Kronich, who wanted me to take a look at a short story by Larry Niven titled At the Bottom of a Hole. However, the story is particularly short, and a sequel to another short story titled How the Heroes Die from the same short story collection, so I'll be covering both of them today. If you'd like to find them yourself, the collection is titled Inconstant Moon and was first published in 1973. About the author. Larry Niven was born in 1938 in Los Angeles, California. He was born to one of the old oil families that were involved in the Teapot Dome scandal that happened under President Warren G. Harding. Niven himself would go to the California Institute of Technology and the Washburn University in Kansas to get a bachelor's degree in mathematics, but soon after he graduated, he started selling science fiction stories and would become a popular author starting in the late 1960s. Larry Niven's success was a bit of an anachronism at the time. The new wave of science fiction had begun in the 1960s, and this trend emphasized literary skill and soft science fiction over the hard, scientifically rigorous, and dryly written science fiction of Golden Age authors like Isaac Asimov, John Campbell, and Robert Heinlein. Niven's fiction was much more in the Golden Age style, and despite that, or very possibly because of that, he got a lot of critical success and earned Hugo, Locus, and Nebula awards for his various works. Niven is most famous for his Ringworld series, starting with the novel Ringworld, published in 1970. The titular Ringworld is a massive alien space installation, a ring that completely surrounds a star, and is occupied by a primitive human offshoot that worships the creators of the Ringworld as gods. The Ringworld is part of Larry Niven's known space setting, and so are the two short stories I'll be looking at today. Unfortunately, something else Niven has in common with the Golden Age of science fiction is his libertarian and, at times, frankly racist opinions, two viewpoints which were held by many, though not all, of the biggest Golden Age authors. In 1968, he joined a list of science fiction authors who supported the Vietnam War. In the 80s, he advised the Reagan administration on space technology, and in 2007, he suggested spreading rumors in Spanish-speaking communities that hospital emergency rooms were killing patients and harvesting their organs since, quote, "the problem of hospitals going broke is hugely exaggerated by illegal aliens who aren't going to pay for anything anyway," end quote. Setting politics aside, I should also mention that the two stories I'm covering today are also part of another short story collection called The Shape of Space, which was published in 1969. Inconstant Moon is actually a UK publication that combines stories from the collections The Shape of Space and All the Myriad Ways, which were published in the United States. Inconstant Moon is itself a rather famous short story that got adapted into an episode of the 1990s reboot of The Outer Limits, and I recommend reading it or watching that episode, even though I'm not covering it today. The review. How the Heroes Die is about an early expedition to Mars that takes place around 2042. One member of the expedition, named Carter, murdered another man, Lou, for propositioning him. Rather than face justice, Carter tears a hole through the plastic lining of the expedition's pressurized air dome as he makes his escape, and he plans to go back and do it again to kill them all so that he can claim that a meteorite wiped everyone out when the relief crew arrives. However, Carter is pursued into the mountains by Alf, Lou's brother, and although Carter kills Alf to get his spare oxygen tanks, he still suffocates on the way back because Alf hid his spare oxygen before Carter got to him. The story ends on an ominous note as a native Martian recovers Alf's corpse. At the Bottom of a Hole is about a smuggler from the asteroid belt, Muller, who crash lands on Mars in 2112 to try and avoid the authorities. Mars is the hole of the title, since Belters tend to avoid planets because of all the resources it takes to get out of the gravity well. Muller landed near the old expedition site from How the Heroes Die, and he uses the old equipment to refuel his engines. However, he then discovers that the expedition was murdered when a group tore holes in the pressurized plastic bubble from a dozen locations at once. Muller eventually realizes that the native Martians were responsible, and the reason no one ever found them outside of a few funeral wells is because they live under the Martian dust, which has the consistency of quicksand. Ultimately, the Martians take Muller's life as well. One last thing. The two stories tie into the known space setting because they get a quick reference in Protector, a known space novel. According to that book, humans are the juvenile form of a spacefaring species of immense power and intelligence. When a human is exposed to the catalyst that creates the adult form, he becomes the titular protector of the human race. As such, he wiped out all Martian life for the crime of killing a handful of human invaders on their home planet. And yes, this is regarded in the story as unjustified genocide. But for the review, oh boy. Let me first say that I got a case of whiplash by going from a story written by a lesbian about the gay experience straight to a story that features a murder by way of gay panic. I will say, in Niven's defense, that while Carter is sometimes the point of view character, the story uses this perspective to show that Carter is a monster who prefers the idea of killing all his fellow expedition members to facing justice for killing one of them. The story also points out that Carter was in no danger whatsoever and did not have to kill Lou, but he did so anyway. On the other hand, the good characters like Alf think that Lou was mentally ill for wanting male companionship. Again, though, I'm willing to give Niven the benefit of the doubt here, since the story was written in the late 1960s, and at the time, homosexuality was officially classified as a mental disorder. This approach was ignorant, but well-intentioned, although the results were very often harmful. Aside from that, How the Heroes Die is a very Golden Age story in that it reads like an adventure by way of a math problem. The main conflict comes from the long-distance chase between Alf and Carter, who both travel at exactly the same speed in Martian buggies, but who have a limited oxygen supply on board. A lot of the text is devoted to figuring out the math of how to get back to the bubble alive after the two men travel past the halfway point when they were supposed to turn around. The conflict is interesting from an intellectual point of view, but the story is rather lacking when it comes to character and setting descriptions that aren't purely technical. At the Bottom of a Hole is also interesting, but mostly it's interesting for all of the outdated science in it. The story originally came out in Galaxy Science Fiction in 1966, 3 years before the moon landing, and at that time there was a theory that the lunar and Martian surfaces would have the consistency of quicksand. The idea was that very fine dust particles that would become silt or clay on Earth had settled across the surface thanks to repeated meteor strikes and the complete lack of water to wash the particles away or cement them together. Fortunately, it turns out that while these particles exist on Mars and the Moon, you need to actively force air or water through them if you want to make them act like quicksand. The other big error is the idea that the Martian atmosphere is primarily nitrogen dioxide. NO2 is a highly reactive molecule that damages human lungs and can lead to acid rain in Earth's atmosphere. And it happens to form a red gas, so there was a hypothesis that that was the reason, or at least part of the reason, why Mars was red. As it turns out, though, Mars's atmosphere is primarily carbon dioxide with a little nitrogen and argon, which are all very stable molecules and atoms. Of course, what's funny is that both of these errors are used to describe the Martians, who swim through the dust oceans and are killed by exposure to water, since it creates nitric and nitrous acid when exposed to nitrogen dioxide. So really, both short stories feature outdated scientific theories. As for the writing, I'd say At the Bottom of a Hole is noticeably better than How the Heroes Die. The majority of the story is written as first-person log entries, and while Muller gets highly technical in places, we also get a lot more impressions from him about what Mars feels like. The discomfort he feels from the high gravity of a planet, the troubles he goes through to refuel his ship, the growing horror he feels as he realizes what happened to the expedition, and where the Martians are hiding. This change in perspective really helped the story transcend its Golden Age roots. It's not easy to find a copy of the story today, but if you happen across it, I'd say it's worth a read, especially since it's so short. The analysis. Not too much to analyze today. Golden Age science fiction tends to be a very what you see is what you get genre, where the main conflict is rooted in a scientific question, and the protagonist has to work out the math, physics, and/or chemistry to create a solution. There's not much going on under the surface. But that being said, Niven does provide some interesting ideas about how society in the asteroid belt would behave. The log entries from Muller's story are framed by two men discussing Muller's fate after a rescue team went to Mars and found his body, his log, and several dead Martians that he killed with a water hose. During these sections, we learn that Belters have a very frontier attitude and consider humans who live on Earth and the Moon to be flatlanders with no real dreams or ambitions. On top of that, they don't consider smuggling to be illegal so much as just high-risk shipping. The Belter idea of a vacation spot is a hollowed-out asteroid, spun up to provide near-Earth gravity and used to grow the plants and animals that Belters eat. The Belters are also very practically minded, and the Belter who hands over the Martian corpses to a representative from Earth has no idea why anyone would want to examine them. The Earthling then points out that space exploration started without any practical purpose, but that idea had never crossed the Belter's mind. This exchange is only a small part of the story, but it has a lot of depth to it. After all, every new discovery in science starts out as theoretical and abstract. It often takes decades or even centuries for people to discover ways to use these abstract theories for practical purposes. Experiments on semiconductors began in the early 19th century, and over 100 years later, semiconductors were used to create the first transistors, the most important building block of the modern computer. Experiments with electricity in the 18th century allowed engineers in the 19th century to harness electricity and use it to power entire cities. So, while the theme of Alien might be beware the unknown for it will surely kill you, the theme of At the Bottom of a Hole is more like learn what you can about the unknown, even if it doesn't seem practical, because otherwise it will surely kill you. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.